All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. As people are joining us, we're going to get started with our second session. I wanted to say that our Cal-HOSA team is very pleased to welcome those of you that were part of the session last week, as well as those who are joining us for the first time today. My name is Gustavo Loera. I am a member of the Cal-HOSA Board of Directors. Before we start, I would like to express my appreciation to our HOSA State Advisor, Cindy Beck, our Board Chair, Tony Pena, our Board of Directors, Carla Cherry, Dee Niedringhaus, Diane Bartosh, June Cuenca, Julie Parr, and our Cal-HOSA advisors for their generosity in helping to make this webinar, Mental Resiliency in Challenging Times, come together. For those of you who are new to Cal-HOSA, please visit our website at calhosa.org to learn more about our organization, and also where you will find the recordings of all of our 4 webinar sessions. Mark, if we can go to the next slide.
Ooh, wait, I'm not ready. There we go.
As we mentioned last week, our webinar series is divided into 4 parts and offered every Monday from 1 to 2 p.m. Our last week's session titled Schools, Mental Health, and Coronavirus, and its Q&A session will be available at the calhosa.org website later this week. Today's session, COVID Shutdown, Mental Health Struggles and Strategies, Part 1, will focus on coping strategies with practical examples to deal with the pandemic-induced isolation. A recording of this session and a special Q&A session will also be available at the calhosa.org website. So please, as you listen to Dr. Mark Reagan's give his presentation, please use the chat feature to type in your questions, and we will get to as many as we can towards the end. And questions that we did not get to will be recorded in the special Q&A session and made available to you, all of you, at the calhosa.org website. Let me reintroduce Dr. Mark Reagan. He is an award-winning psychiatrist and transformational leader in the mental health and recovery and consumer movement. Dr. Reagan's counseled people with severe mental illnesses, psychosis, homelessness, incarceration, substance abuse, and lifelong trauma. His counseling focus is on helping people with mental illness find their strengths to rebuild their lives and reconnect with the community as they engage in their own journey of recovery. He has lectured around the world and written extensively on the recovery process and how to support it. So with this, Mark, I give you the, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much. Looks like my hair was much shorter in that picture. I think the pandemic is, I can't remember when my haircut last was, but ways back. All right, so welcome aboard. Thank you guys for coming back. For the next 2 sessions, we're going to be real specific about things that have just seemed to have come up within the structure of the pandemic itself. Last time we were talking more about mental health struggles in general, or of young people in general. And to start with, I want to start with my surprise in the first few weeks going through this of, this seemed so hard. I've mentioned the other day that I read the Diary of Anne Frank, and she was up in an attic for like 2.5 years. How come in like a few weeks I was struggling, or a couple months I'm struggling? And I get there's some people that are struggling because they know somebody who's died of coronavirus, or it's really had a big impact on their family, but direct death. But I don't know anyone who has. I only know one of the students I'm working with who had a couple uncles die. It's at this point, the numbers aren't high, so most people don't know somebody who's died, although the woman I met who did have her uncles die, she had a real different kind of emotional reaction to the fear of the epidemic than the rest of us. And also there are some people who have serious stressors from the economic loss, that they're in danger of becoming homeless, or they have no food, or their businesses collapsed, or something like this. But for the rest of us, or even the people, so there's also an underlying, this just seems crummy and difficult. emotionally and mentally. And is this it? Are we like all like wimps and we can't handle anything, or what's going on? Why could Anne Frank do this seemingly reasonably well, and we're struggling so much? And I think that this is harder than you might have expected, because it's not so much the outside stressors that are destroying us mentally, not so much the virus and the economics themselves. It's the loss of our internal resilience and protective factors and our strength ourselves. Like I asked my father, I said, you know, you and your older sister, you were like little in World War II, and she was a teenager. How hard was it for you guys in World War II? He said, I don't remember it being hard at all. My sister went out to clubs and she was dancing every night with older men and pretending having a good old time. And then we bought a bunch of black market gasoline ration tickets and moved to California. I don't remember this being something that altered our lives as kids. That this is not so much the outer stressor, it's the way our lives have been changed along the way, the things that we can just grasp onto that hold us together that we're losing. And that's why I started the first section talking about things like resilience and protective factors and strengths, because I think this particular stressor is getting to us by undermining those things. Also, it doesn't have a clear beginning and end. Now that's true of every major stressor. People in the Great Depression didn't know when that was going to end, or when World War II was going to end, or anything like that. But we're like, how long is this, and what'll go on, and what'll happen? And we don't even really have, there's a lot of uncertainty going around. And once a stressor goes from an acute stressor, let's do something now for a few weeks or a month, to longer term, you start getting different reactions from chronic stress, which is different than an acute stressor. So I think if we look at it from that perspective, I don't think we're being weaklings to be struggling so much to go through this. But I do think that it's eroding away at our strengths in a way that a strictly outside stressor and an acute stressor would not be doing. For instance, most of us lived through September 11th. That was a clear outside stressor, an acute stressor, and it wasn't something that affected us for months and months and months on a daily basis, undermining our lives. You could go on and do things to help yourself feel fine. So the first thing I noticed was that time seemed to be flowing rather weirdly. Mostly slowly, but some slow and some fast, and kind of was this unrealness to this. And I don't mean this like, you know, Einstein's business about time, gravity, and going around black holes. I just mean that time alters depending on what you're doing subjectively. Like when you're waiting for somebody and they're late, it can seem like minutes can take forever, hours, or that business about a watch pot never boils. Or on the other hand, it can be positive, like when you go traveling. I love traveling because every minute seems like it's longer because you're very aware and in the moment, and the hours can seem really like a lot of time going on with things. But time flowed weird. I remember a cartoon at the beginning of the pandemic that said March was the longest year of my life. Or I saw one recently with a calendar of May. It said how long it felt, and it went weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks down on the May. That it can feel really weird. So time is flowing in a weird way because of our subjective experiences. Now, if you go back far enough, time used to flow with natural rhythms. You'd get up with the sun, you'd have a day, it'd get hot, you do a siesta, the evening, go to bed when the sun goes down. You go with the seasons, depending on whether it's crops coming in or too hot in the summer, after being cold and inside in the winter. And you have this rhythm, time would flow with natural rhythms. When we invented the electricity and the light bulb and air conditioning and things like this, we got rid of all of that. And then our time started being affected by schedules. And we know this is my work day, this is the hours I get up to go to work. After work, this is the weekend, this is my school schedule. We have these ongoing schedules. And actually, people have a serious trouble when those schedules are disrupted, like with retirement. I don't know what to do with myself, or I'm around the house, or what to do to fill this time, or with unemployment. Unemployment can be terribly difficult, not just because you don't have money coming in, because of what's supposed to happen to the day every day merges into each other and starts seeming purposeless. So one of the huge things I think that's important in this is if you've lost your schedule, you don't have a regular, especially now that summer is coming, you lost your schedule, you don't have So you don't have work, you don't have things happen, to try to put a schedule back in, to try to create rhythms of your day, to getting up in the morning, taking care of hygiene, making meals at regular times. One of the things, if you spend all day just kind of eating whenever it's sort of the mood gets you, or when you're bored, or when you're snacking, or in between all day long, this is a good way to start gaining weight over this pandemic. And it also gets rid of the structure of time going by. It's really important for those of us working at home and even doing school at home to separate out your mind space, that I'm in the mind space of I'm at work, or I'm at the mind space of at school, or I'm in the mind space of relaxing or having fun. It's one of the things unemployed people talk about, is there's no such thing as weekends or vacations, because there's no work to be in vacation from, or in between. It all just feels the same. So like my sister, for example, she's working at home and she's working in her living room. She takes the end table from her couch, puts it in front of her, puts her computer on it, makes a desk, turns off the TV, and throws the dog out. So that's her workspace, her work time, her work mindset. When she's finished at the end of the day, takes and puts the table back, turns back on the TV, lets the dog back in, and now it's her play space. Because if you don't do that, they don't meld very well. You find yourself procrastinating on all your work activities, and then you'll find yourself not enjoying the play activities because you're feeling guilty about the work or school things you didn't do. Kids need schedules too around to keep them going as well, and to keep things going, to have a schedule moving along, or time is going to start working weird. And once it does, that ends up really disorienting. So to try to put in an ongoing time schedule, I think it's my first suggestion for what's going wrong and how we can help with this. Sleep shifts. Many people are finding that they're, with nothing much to do, they're staying up later and later and later, especially younger people. And they're getting up later until it's getting all the way backwards. They're staying up till 3, 4, 5, 7 in the morning, and then waking up at 1 or 2 in the afternoon or something, and then the whole day is gone, and this can feel real low productivity. It turns out that people's natural circadian rhythm, how long we sleep, is a little over 24 hours. I assume this is so we can adjust as the sun changes. So they did an experiment where they put some people in a house inside a cave and took away all their electronics, all their clocks, all the outside world, and they couldn't see the sun either. And they left them there for like a couple months, and they watched what happened to them. And when they came back, the people thought they came back about a day or two early, because each day had been like 24 and a half hours, and it shifted all the way around of their sleep-wake cycle. If you don't have any schedule, you're not paying attention to the sun, you're just getting up whenever you feel like it, you will naturally drift later and later and later like this. It's very difficult to force yourself to go to bed or go to sleep when you're not tired. It's much easier to force yourself to wake up. So if you're having this problem and you're drifting later and later and later, the way you can avoid that is set an alarm clock in the morning. I don't actually care what time in the morning it is. You can set it at 6, you can set it at 10, you can set it at 11, whatever you want. Just put it sometime, and then actually get up. Don't just like turn it off and go back to bed for 3 hours more. Actually get up, and that will anchor your sleep, so you'll be falling asleep and then getting up at that time, which will help them mentally. If your sleep gets worse and worse and worse, that's bad for you mentally overall. Now, most of us, when we're sitting sheltering at home, are much less physically active than we were before. Now, of course, there's kind of two classes of people. Some are like me, that you didn't do very much anyway. You weren't exercising very much, but at least you were like getting in your car and walking to work or up and back or the store or something, not just sitting all day in the living room. And then there's other people who did a whole lot of exercise. People who are like dancers or athletes or do running every day or this sort of thing. They are likely to feel really crummy without this exercise. I had one young man who was on the cross-country team, and he'd run for 4 hours a day practicing and things. Without any of that running, just staying at home, he started feeling less and less energetic, less and less together, and as a result, his attention started getting worse, and he started doing worse in classes, and he couldn't structure very much and got more depressed and kind of drifted away because he was used to all this physical activity. Even if you're not used to very much, none is really bad. So people will often ask me, so, you know, I'm feeling depressed or sluggish. I don't really want to take meds. Is there something else I can do? Well, I always say, yes, exercise in very modest amounts works as good as antidepressants do statistically for many people if you actually get yourself to do that. Modest amounts means like a half an hour of whatever you want. I'm not trying to build muscles here or your heart strength or anything like that. Just getting your body going so that your mind gets going to affect the sluggishness. Once again, if you've got a schedule, you can put in the schedule, get up every morning and exercise in the evening whenever you want. You can walk around the block. You can do yoga tapes or Tai Chi or something. You can do Zoom, whatever you want. Bring out your old Jane Fonda exercise videos, whatever you want for half an hour each day to keep your body moving. Especially if you're used to large amount of exercise, do even more to keep it going. Otherwise, you're going to get sluggish and more depressed. Fourth one is there are people around who are having serious financial problems from this. And yes, they've tried with a variety of programs to help out with these programs. And I want to talk about some of the more psychological emphasis of the finances rather than the finances themselves, rather than giving you a list of resources or financial things, for instance. One is most government programs that help out financially with one thing or another are very difficult to use. They have all kinds of flaws and communication problems and paperwork and bureaucracies. Talk about time flowing strangely. You put in an application, when does it come back? And it's supposed to be now, and time flows incredibly slowly when your rent is due and the money didn't come from whatever program you're waiting for it for. It can take huge amount of effort just to keep going with this stuff. And it can be very draining and easy to give up and say, never mind. Look at benefits assistance as your job and put aside time in your schedule to actually pursue it. Because if you don't, you procrastinate it. If you procrastinate it, it won't happen because these systems are so hard to use and they require so much persistence to keep going. Make a list of the benefits you need and what programs there are and spend time with it. Actually, your job is getting these benefits. The other half of what I want to bring up about this echoes back to the scheduling thing. Well, they found in towns where you like take away the factory and then you got a bunch of unemployed people and they sit around thinking about, well, am I going to work? And they got nowhere to go the game. They file for unemployment and you come back there in about a year and you got a bunch of depressed people who are now on disability, who are using opiates, who are drinking too much, is going no place. Not so, some of it is because they lost their places, but more often what's happened to them is they lost their schedule and their sense of purpose. There wasn't anything productive happening on and their whole sense of who they are drifted away. Not having anything during the day, even for you students who are used to being really productive, and now you've got summertime and not much, and they canceled all your clubs and the extra summer things and all these things. You go, wow, there's no reason to do much. What's the point in anything? You find yourself drifting away, which may feel like a vacation the first week or two, but this starts to grind into months that can really get to you to find things to feel productive. Even if it doesn't pay any money, if you're volunteering or helping out, do something. All right, I don't have a job, no money's coming in, but I'm going down to the food bank to volunteer every day for an hour. Find things to do to give yourself purpose, because for most of us, job and school is a great deal of our purpose. And when it's taken away, even temporarily, it can be really difficult. And benefits procure does not feel very productive or helpful to most people. All right, here's a complicated one about the medical risks of coronavirus, about should we be scared of getting this illness and dying? Isn't this a scary pandemic happening? We've got 110,000 people dying. Shouldn't we be scared of this? And I want to talk a little bit about how we are scared or not scared of things in general. We have, hold on a sec. We have our fears that are built into our emotions. They're things that evolutionarily helped us when we were like hunter-gatherers. And most of us are still fearful for these things. Things like the dark, small places, heights, snakes, spiders, scary big animals, fire, Strangers, this turns out to be all you guys with public speaking problems and stranger anxiety. That's built in. Other strangers were really dangerous when you're in a hunter-gatherer. And those things, we don't have to worry. We just respond emotionally and instinctively. But those are not the things that are actually dangerous in our life. The most dangerous thing in our life normally is driving to work or school and back. It's the most dangerous thing we do. But we don't get all worked up about that in general. We go on autopilot and turn on our radio and talk to our friends and do anything except actually pay attention where we're driving. We are when we don't know what's actually dangerous, we look to our emotions to tell us what to be dangerous to, and they terribly give us misinformation. For instance, we're terribly scared of sharks or terribly scared of terrorists, neither of which kills hardly anybody, because they're emotional and they're on the news and they affect us. When we start to have to think about what we're scared of, the thinking part of our brain is not very good at actually being a good warning system. So it starts driving itself crazy, going round and round and round thinking about things. And we've got lots and lots of people already who overthink and worry about stuff. Every social interaction, I'm worried what's going to happen. I have to do a presentation in class. What's going to happen when I go home? How's my next date going to go? You worry round and round and round. I get to meet lots and lots of college students who have these worries going round and round and round and round because they're trying to get some kind of security out of thoughts, which you can only get out of emotions, actually. So with that as a background, we have this weird situation where we're told there's this deadly pandemic. But most of us haven't actually met anybody who's died. And the way we're hiding the dead bodies, keeping them away because of the quarantine, so who gets infected, makes it even less real. If anything, the politicians and our leaders seem to have more emotional impact than we do because they've seen people die, or they've talked to these medical professionals who are shaken and stuff. You see these people on the news, where the rest of it has this kind of unreal quality to this because it's not in our daily lives for most of us. I think we may see that shifting as the summer goes on, because we may see more as cases continue more and more, especially with the huge demonstrations. More and more of us will probably know people who die. And that may shift our emotional, how much we're scared of this, from this kind of intellectual anxiety producing thing to being an actual emotional reaction to something that happened to us, an actual loss in our lives. It's very hard to get our centered around something that we get different announcements from different leaders, and it switches around and information changes and there's data and statistics. Should we be scared at 1.2% or 2.1%? And all these numbers, how does that help us figure out anything? So the other thing about this is that the true risk of dying is incredibly age dependent. The risk of dying of a 75-year-old is 10,000 times as high as for a 15-year-old. And it's an exponential curve between those 2 points. So when you say, is this a high risk or a low risk, that actually depends enormously on how old you are for you personally, or how old the people are you're hanging out with, or with you. Because obviously for the older people, with the risk is maybe 10% of dying, that's actually a big scary number. Risk of 15 or 1 in 100,000 of dying, that's an inconceivable number that's hard to figure, that probably around all the other things that we ignore that are of risk. So it's very hard to schedule a risk because different people are at different risk also. Also, some of us are more risk averse than others in the first place. Some of us, don't do scary things, or don't drive on freeways, or don't go snorkeling with sharks. And some people do, even though there's some risk with all these various things. What kind of risk taker are you? But it's going to create a lot of mental uncertainty between the weird information, the emotion thinking disconnect, the amount that it's changing as time goes on, and this exponential age curve. So when you're thinking about how to cope with this mental stuff, think about what kind of information and what kind of emotional stuff are you taking in, and how good or how bad it is for you. Which of the people who are sitting on our TV all the time do you find their information is helpful to you, and which ones do you find that isn't helpful to me at all? Which ones do you find their emotional tone is helpful? And which ones do you find their emotional tone, it doesn't help you at all? And you don't have to do this the same way anyone else does. Someone might find someone like Dr. Fauci to be very emotionally supportive and good information, and someone might like country music stars or Bank of America or Jeep telling us on commercials things are going to be okay. What feels good to you? What doesn't feel good, both emotionally and information? And be selective. Don't just eat randomly. They're offering us an overwhelming buffet of this stuff. Are you snacking or even binging all day long without any selection of what you're taking in? And now you're feeling kind of overstuffed and overwhelmed and it's not working. Be real selective, both information-wise and emotion-wise, of what you're taking in about the medical risk itself. The way those, last comment of it, the way those two things interact is, yes, it's good to be emotionally calm. But if you're emotionally calm and taking bad risks, you're actually in danger. That's not so good. Someone who's just always reassuring, I don't worry about things, and then they end up, falling off the side of El Capitan, may not be the best person to be following their advice. For you, make sure you didn't turn off your emotions while you're still in danger. Are you being reasonably protective? Are there older people with you? Have you made some reasonably rational decisions? And then get your emotional state down together. But pay attention to both those sides. One of the smart ass things I say to the students is they come in saying they're anxious and I need to turn off my anxiety. Can you help me calm down with something? I say, well, before we turn down your anxiety is your fire alarm system. Is your house on fire? Is there something terribly wrong here, terribly risky? To get it down, going along the way. Being anxious about actually dangerous things isn't a problem. That's actually helping you make solutions. So don't just try to lower the anxiety, try to be rationally problem solving and keep yourself calming. Now, health risk as a bigger field, this is how do we manage our risk of coronavirus. Health risk, strangely enough, ends up as part of manners and etiquette. I thought it was weird the other day on TV I was watching, they had some doctor and like one of these people who does manners things on the TV. I think she was like Emily Post's granddaughter or something like this. Together, I'm like, why am I listening to someone talking manners and health things? Because most of our health things, when you get past those dangerous things, like the heights and the dark places and the strangers, they get built into our manners. We have all these dietary rules about manners. We have shaking hands rules. We have cleanliness rules. We have how you cough rules. We have, some places do masks and some places don't do masks. And so I think paying attention to these which things are becoming our ongoing manners and etiquette that you just do without thinking is a way to actually have health management strategies. You automatically, when I walk by someone on a morning walk out in the street to be 6 feet away from them and then come back in as just an ongoing manner now that I would have never done before. What are our new manners? There are preventative health interventions, things like vaccines, things like health and cancer screenings, things like taking medicine to keep your blood pressure low. You don't have a heart attack. Hopefully we will come up with some of these more to help. We don't have hardly any of this to help with this virus right now, but remember, we have a lot of mixed feelings, some people, about things like vaccines too. And then we have a bunch of things that help us promote being healthy so that we can fight off things in our natural way. Things like exercise and diet and hygiene, safe sex. That may be self-sex too, but safe sex, avoiding unhealthy substances, meditation, stress management. Now, when you think about it, most of us are not very good at any of these things in the first place. And most of us are actually suffering from all kinds of medical conditions and going to suffer from all kinds of medical conditions that would have been preventable, that could have, if we did better health risk management. So this is a time to think about, how am I paying attention to my health management in the first place? How am I being a healthy person in the first place? And then how would that apply to this? Maybe we'll learn some lessons from this that'll keep us healthier for other things like smoking and obesity. I'll tell you one quick story about this, about fitting is, so I had a mild heart attack about 4 or 5 years ago. And a couple days after being in the hospital, we went to a barbecue place. I'm sitting and looking at this rib in front of me, and I really love ribs. And started wondering, so what risk of heart attack is this rib worth? I wasn't thinking about it before this happened. Is eating ribs a healthy or an unhealthy behavior? Now, for better or worse, they gave me Lipitor, and now I can eat ribs whenever I want without worrying about my heart, which may not be making me more healthy. But the point of the story is thinking about in general, our health behaviors. If you weren't very good at doing vaccines before, you might not get very good at this. If you weren't very good at not smoking, keeping away things from your lungs, this might be trouble for you. If your immune system was unhealthy because you unhealthy, might be tough for you. If you had all these pre-existing conditions that were from being unhealthy, this may be tough for you. All right, moving on. All right, this one I think is probably the most important one of the whole thing. So I want to give you some background of this one. Before I do. Relationships and personal contact with other people and connections are incredibly important for our mental health overall. And that we have learned some things about this. And for many people, this pandemic and the shutdown is the first time this has really been brought so hard home to us. God, I'm just not doing very well without other people around. I miss these other people around, or talking to, or just going to dinner with someone, or lunch, or doing these various things along the way. Especially if you're extroverted, this can be very hard, but also if you're introverted. And I want to give you 4 points of reference about what we understand about mental health and relationships. The first one's an old study. It's the Harvard Study of Adult Development. This study began in 1939. It's an 80-year-old study by now. They took a bunch of Harvard freshmen. JFK was actually one of their original study subjects. And they took a bunch of young men and women from the south side of Boston to have a different socioeconomic group than the Harvard freshmen. And they've been following them ever since, for the 80 years since then. The numbers, they're starting to run out of people to get really old. And they followed all kinds of things about health and mental health regularly. And what they found, which surprised them, was even for physical things like heart attacks, the single most important variable determining how long you're going to live and what's going to happen to your health wise was not, did you eat too many ribs, or did you exercise, or this stuff. It was, what are the number and quality of your relationships? Were you married? Are you happily married? Do you have friends? Do you have relationships with your kids and other family members? These things predict your outcome for both health and mental health enormously. We're simply not meant to be by ourselves. To be connected to all these things enormously alters our health and mental health. The second study there is a little older. It's from 2000. It's a book that's worth looking at. It's from Robert Putnam, called Bowling Alone. This book said the reason we're struggling so much emotionally in our country is because our social fabric, our social capital is decreasing. The title of the book has to do with the people used to belong to bowling leagues and go regularly and meet friends in their bowling. And now people rarely bowl at all. And if they do, they just go by themselves. He has a whole pile of factors in this book. Things from, we live in suburban and we drive around. We don't sit on our porches and say hi to people. There's no village centers. We move around, so we disrupt our relationships. Women are in the workplace, so there isn't that social fabric of helping with the schools and other community activities. Our churches and religious things, the attendance is way down, that was holding the fabric. That in so many ways, our communities, relationships, and social capital is much lower than it was, and going down and down and down. That we're getting more and more disconnected in our life. A little story, for example, of this. My boss at work is from Korea. He came from there about 20 or 30 years ago. He said when he was little, he lived in mostly rural areas. Those rural areas, and there was a bunch of farm animals and things and going around, and extended families. Now Korea, like many places, became highly urbanized, and people live in Seoul in these little teeny apartments. And the market for small pets, pet dogs and cats, has gone way, way up compared to when people were rural and were connected to all these other animals and people in the first place. Because people don't do very well all by themselves lonely as their social capital goes down. Next reference here is a really recent book, 2018, by a lady named Jean Twenge down at San Diego State, called iGen. This one is taking firm aim at you guys who are the high school students on this one. She says, you guys spending all your time on your iPhones is terrible for you. It's rotting your mental health. All those graphs I showed about mental health going down and down, she says that's because you're using your iPhones all the time. And she says, especially if you're using them for more than 5 hours a day, outside of something you need for work or school, for social things, that your amount of depression, anxiety, and suicidal feelings goes up and up and up. She thinks the reason for that is not necessarily because the iPhone itself is so toxic, but because it's taking the place of doing other face-to-face social things. You're not dating as much, you're not hanging out in the mall as much, you're not getting drunk together as much, you're not driving around at no purpose, driving your parents crazy as much, you're not having sex in back rooms as much, you're on your phone all the time instead. These things, and that isn't creating the same kind of emotional growth and emotional connectedness as face-to-face relationships would have. This book created a big stir at the time and still is a powerful thesis. Last one I want to throw out there is one of my favorite TED Talks. This is Brene Brown back in 2010. She is a social work researcher in Texas, and she's talking about vulnerability. Her main audience is actually women executives who are trying to make it and are powerful women in places. And she said she always hated being vulnerable, but that there's no real emotional connection unless you're vulnerable, because there's no trust without vulnerability. It has to be on both sides. She says you don't need to be vulnerable to everybody, but if you want to have a relationship, there has to be vulnerability on both sides, and there has to be trust going as a result. That without vulnerability, you can't have intimacy. And that it's not, vulnerability is a sign of weakness. Vulnerability is a sign of strength. It's only when you feel confident enough to be vulnerable that you can have relationships. This is why many people are anxious and shy and not very confident, have trouble with relationships, because they won't even start with the vulnerability part to let down their walls because they're feeling not very confident. So those 4 things about relationships, put them into how right now we're all locked in and can't spend time face-to-face with people. So we've got to use virtual relationships instead of regular ones. And we need to look at, is Twenge right, and how can we make it as positive or unpositive? Because lots of social media is like fast food. It looks like a relationship. It looks like it'd be nurturing, but it isn't really. It's actually toxic. It's actually addictive, and it leaves us with our connectedness overweight and undernourished. We've got 8 jillion friends on the social media and no actual friends. So looking at those studies, look at what you're doing now when you're trying to create your social friend, these virtual relationships to keep things going. Is there mutuality and caring and trust and vulnerability? Is there actually some sharing going, or using the screen to create even more distance? Is this social media thing you're doing actually building connectedness and social capital? Are you connecting to people, or are you just in these Zoom meetings for the sake of being there? Is it enjoying and satisfying? Is this nurturing you? Does this feel good to you? Is it engaging and mindful? Are you paying attention, or are you just spacing out the whole time on things and not actually paying attention? So when you're trying to use strategies to replace relationships that you're terribly missing with virtual things, try to pay attention to those variables, because that's what it takes to have the relationships around. All right, last item we're going to do on this week is about pleasure and fun in life. One of the things I noticed a few weeks ago is that I got my schedule going a little bit. I'm walking in the mornings. I'm doing some connection with other people on the internet and talking to family and things. And I realized I'm not having hardly any fun, because almost all the things I do for fun have been forbidden. I can't go to restaurants anymore. I can't go to movies anymore. I can't go to the beach anymore. I can't travel anymore. I can't even plan to travel anymore, really, because that's no fun when you can't actually go anywhere. That the main things that I enjoyed have been cut off. And I think many people just find, wait a second, I'm not getting as much natural fun from my life, even if it was just things like hanging out with friends and doing things. Now, we have pleasure centers inside of our brains, back from our reptilian brain, that tell us when things are okay or not okay. And if we don't get enough stimulation, it says things aren't okay, and then we feel hungry and bored and anxious and restless and irritable and empty and unloved and insecure and depressed. And then if we don't find something to do, just distracting doesn't help that. At the end of a day of, I try to distract myself with video games or puzzles, it's like, I still feel crappy. I didn't have any fun. I didn't have any enjoyment. My pleasure centers didn't get stimulated at all like this. Killing time doesn't recharge us. It usually is more drain. To actually be recharged and enjoy things, you have to be in the moment. Or as the Asian groups would call this is mindfulness. You can't have fun while you're thinking about something else, or while you're checked out, or while you're just wasting time. You have to have fun by actually being in the moment and engaged. Now, if your life isn't providing enough fun, we've developed all kinds of artificial pleasure center stimulators to make us feel good, even when our lives aren't working on, accepting life on life's terms. This includes alcohol, pot, other drugs, caffeine, nicotine, dark chocolate, sugar, carbs, sex, love, exercise, risk-taking, meditation, prayer, gratitude, creativity, and being out in nature. All these things stimulate our pleasure centers. And almost all of us are using something pretty intentionally. We know what our thing is. All right, to get through the day, I need some more pot to go through the day. If I don't get enough for exercise or running, it's not going to do for the day. I miss having sex. I miss my dark chocolate. Where's my potato chips? What are you doing that you actually fill the day with? And it's likely you may have been cut off both from your natural fun and from your artificial fun in this pandemic, and you're feeling poorly as a result. Every artificial stimulator has side effects. None of them are even the ones that seem good, something like meditation, you get kind of weirder after enough meditation for a while. Some of them are terrible. Cigarettes kill a third of everybody who uses them. Heroin kills about half of everybody who uses them. They have different side effects. And to a large extent, I believe that the long-term, your health and mental health depends on which one of these things you're using regularly. Many people have switched over from cigarettes and alcohol to carbs and sugar. And as a result, we've got obesity has passed up cigarettes as the #1 cause of preventable death. What are the ones you're using now, and how's it affecting you? This is not a bad time in the pandemic to do a little reconsideration of, what am I using? What are the side effects I got so far? What are the long-term ones I might get? And how dependent on it am I? Do I need this every day, just sometimes, only when I'm feeling really bad? How dependent am I? Even the less dangerous choices can become a problem if they start becoming our entire life, edging out our normal life. This is most obvious, like in an addict who's just looking for, where do I get some more drugs, or where do I get some more alcohol, or I can't start the day until I get my coffee. You could also see this in soldiers who come back and they're addicted to risk, or the excitement of the battlefield, and just hanging out the grocery store with their family just doesn't work, and they sign up again for another tour. All the way to people who sit in a cave meditating and escape into the pleasure center of that meditation, and they disconnect from being involved with other people in their lives. Anything you can get, you can build and build and build until it becomes the entire focus of your life, and your brain will keep adjusting like that. And then when you try to stop, but that's when you get withdrawal. That's when you feel really bad. You're dry drunk. You're all edgy because you lost what's there. I will meet people, for instance, who they'll be at a breakup, and they'll be coming and being depressed at a breakup. And it's, they miss the person, but they also miss feeling in love. They miss the sex. That was a person who was their whole social life. They go out dancing. They were drinking with this person. All kinds of things were around that person. Without the person, there's no fun and there's no pleasure center going on, and they're just a depleted person, feeling all down in the dumps as a result. They're all depleted like that. You may find yourself in this pandemic depleted because there's less natural fun, and because you don't want to rely too much on your artificial ones. I think that's my last slide for today. I got a set of things of the same style for next week. I think we have time to do maybe a couple questions and see what comes up.
Yes, so let me go to the, again, if you have any questions, please write them down on the chat feature, and we will ask them as they come. So Mark, the first question reads from Mindy. Earlier on the presentation, you recommended athletes compensate for a lack of exercise through home workouts. However, how would you recommend compensating the face-to-face connection that comes along with sports without social media?
So that's a great question, because it shows that these things are all interrelated, and that's why it makes it hard. That being the athlete and on your team and working out, even if you're a cross-country runner, you tend to like the connection of the team as well. That you go, you know what? I've got the physical part covered, but I'm missing the relationships, and that's good self-awareness to say, wait a second, I need to do something about the relationships too. And then it comes, well, how do I connect to this team in other ways? Can we have virtual hangouts a couple times a week? Can we be talking? And that's back to, do we do things that are fun, that have some vulnerabilities, that have some trust involved? And it's not going to be as easy because it was already scheduled into your athletic thing to start with. Some people are doing exercise groups, by the way. People are doing workouts together where a whole team does get together and put on the screen, and you're at home, and you can, just like a Zoom thing with a bunch of screens, you can see your whole team doing this as well, to try to combine the two. None of this is going to be as good as the actual thing. But if you keep your body going some, and you keep some social connectedness, you get less drained as a result. But you're right that it's got those two features for many people in athletics.
Next question comes from Prishna. How can you encourage others, and even yourself, to put in the effort to create routines and wake up early in order to better take care of yourself, and especially your mental health?
So this is a problem with almost all kinds of advice about this is good for you. Yeah, I know a whole lot of things that are good for me that I don't actually do. So this is, how do I get myself to do things that are good for me? And sometimes this goes with the intellectual part. That's why I do these elaborate explanations so that's a rationale to say, all right, I don't really want to make a schedule, but I'll do it anyway because I understand. Intellectually, you motivate yourself to do something intellectually. Unfortunately, most of us are really good at talking our brain out of doing things that are good for us. We respond on a more emotional side. And so then there's got to be some pleasure involved, or some feedback that makes it work out well. So if you're like trying to get yourself to do a schedule, don't start the schedule with, I'm going to get up at 7 a.m. and wash the kitchen, unless you really love washing kitchens. Start the schedule with something that's really fun for you. Whatever you like the most at the beginning to start off as rewarding. Hey, I got up and got started. And then it can be, after an hour or two, that the day is still young. I've got things I can do. Also, don't be cruel to yourself. You don't have to be unrealistic. If you were before getting up at 10, don't set your alarm at 7. Put it wherever is not cruel to you. For the schedule. I know when I went to college, I never scheduled a class before 11 a.m. because I wasn't up before 11. But if it's drifting past that and missing those classes too, then I'm starting to drift away. So one is about talking yourself into it. The second one is about the enjoyment part. Can you do things that are fun in the schedule to make it reinforcing? The lady who talked before about the team is also right. It's easier to do things with someone else than by yourself. That's why things like Weight Watchers work, that you go, all right, I'll go and we'll do check-ins and things. It may be that you have to have a couple friends that you're all three, you're getting up at the same 9 in the morning, and your first activity is checking in and eating breakfast together, or doing whatever you enjoy together at the same time. That the first thing you do is something that's got other people around, so you've got their support, so you're not doing it alone. Also, that often helps you feel a little obligated to somebody else to get yourself to do, because you don't want to be like ashamed or look stupid because the other person's doing it along with you. I had one other thought about that, but I lost it. I'll go on to something else. Maybe it'll come back to me.
Okay. I have another question from Stacy. How would you approach starting discussions with your family regarding mental health and the positive changes you hope to see in your household during this time?
Is Stacy around to say more about what she means about that? Can we unmute Stacy?
Yeah, let's try to unmute her. Stacy.
I'm not sure where she's going with that one.
Hi, I know that in my household, mental health isn't something that's easily discussed, and I was just wondering how you can bring something up to your parents without them feeling intimidated.
So remember I was talking about, we medicalize mental health things. To look for language that is within your own traditions of things you're proud of, that feels strengths overall. Like your family might feel good about people being helpful, doing chores to help each other out, or being there for each other, or getting up early in the morning, or being physically strong. And that's why even you may have noticed even the names of these various strategies aren't about mental illness labels. They're about things like schedule and sleep and relationships. And to try to see what your family values already, what they believe makes them strong, and see if you can put it within those terms along the way. It's been an issue for mental health all over the world, that mental health has taken the approach that says we need to psychoeducationalize everybody around the world into seeing it into a medical model, rather than we need to meet them where they are along the way. Many people are better off talking about how strong you're feeling, how healthy, how your nerves are, talking about if you've done the rituals, have you been good to your ancestors, have you said your prayers, have been grateful to God. These various things can have expressions when a bunch of cultures, they don't need to be made into mental health behaviors just because that's the language or metaphor that we're using here. Does that help, Stacy?
Yes, thank you.
Good.
All right, Mark. Earlier you talked about self-efficacy. Can you talk a little bit about the connection between self-efficacy and mental health?
So the premise I was trying to put forward last week, for those of you who were here last week, is that we develop along the way in our lives. We have stages of development. The first one is about basic security, and are things going to be all right, and finances and food and stuff like this. The next one is, am I an okay person, just in myself? The next one is about relationships, connections to other people. I talked about a lot today too. And the fourth one is about some spiritual connections or higher things, which we'll actually get to next week. We didn't talk about this time. So self-efficacy is the idea that what I do matters. I have some impact on what's going around me. So if we take those, and it plays out at each of these levels, if you go, I'm hungry and there's nothing I can do, it's helpless, I'm going to sit here passively waiting for someone to help me. You're going to look like those people on the roofs in Louisiana and New Orleans with the flood, waiting passively for somebody to help, or people sitting in refugee camps waiting for somebody to help. If you feel like, no, what I do makes a difference, then you can start feeling some sense that I can do things that make a difference. Then it can be like the Japanese who were in the internment camps, the terrible internment camps in World War II. They said, oh, we could make a difference. They started making sports teams in schools and concerts and things to try to, so they could be as strong as possible, so they can get through this terrible time as well as possible. The part about the next stage about for yourself, self-efficacy is, do I feel strong in myself? Am I a worthwhile person? This is how my confidence, how my security, do I feel like I'm a good person? And it goes to that next level about relationships back with Brene Brown with the vulnerability. If you don't feel reasonably strong about yourself, you're likely not to be willing to lower your walls, to be vulnerable and trusting, and limit your connectedness and end up really isolated as a result. Those are the first three that most of us come. We can have discussions about the one about the spirituality, but just as an overall point, most true spirituality comes out of humility and out of acceptance and I turned my life over to a higher power. I accepted the presence of God within me. I realized I wasn't the one running my whole life. It was being run for God's purpose or Christ's purpose or my karma or whatever it is that you believe. That takes a huge amount of a sense of self to lower the walls that much in order to be trusting enough to have God running your life instead of you. That isn't just that tends to work much better out of a place of acceptance rather than a place of passivity and desperation, even at that level. So self-efficacy is a key element in mental health at every level to be able to succeed.
Well, thank you, Mark. This is the conclusion of this session. Again, we'll be back here next Monday at 1 o'clock. Mark, any last remarks?
Take care of yourselves along the way here. We've got all kinds of scary things and also some really hopeful and promising and exciting things happening. I think on the medical side, we're going to see a lot more illness and death coming up as a consequence of the opening up and the massive protests. So be aware, especially of that piece, that your risks have gone up in a practical way because the amount of infections around us has probably gone up because we lowered the distancing. But we felt it was important to the economy, and lots and lots of people, an amazing number of people, thought it was important to fight racism and be together as a society. We will, in the fourth session, talk about a legacy of this, and I'm not sure that this stuff we're doing about the Black Lives Matter and the racism isn't going to be part of the legacy of this that nobody would have predicted at the beginning, that coming together and being in this together may mean having to break down some very old walls that are between us and make lots of people suffer. So take care of yourself, and I'll see you next week. And we're living strange times.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.